Hey YouTube, we have another Tim Cain reaction here. This is Tim Cain game flavor. I have no idea what he means, but we're about to find out. Let's do it. Fair warning for anybody who's new here, I do yap. I like to make sure that I add enough content to these videos, and I love to yap.
Hi everyone, it's me, Tim.
Hi Tim.
Today I want to talk about game flavor.
Yeah.
And I'm deliberately doing this on a Friday fun day because what I'm going to talk about is very subjective. So kind of view this as Tim talks about game development at another very high level of description.
Okay, that's good. I like these.
And I almost didn't do this video because what I mean by game flavor is really hard to describe. I'm going to try to do it,
Okay.
but it's hard. If you watched my video last week on high-level design direction, there's bits and pieces of that in that video, but game flavor is a very subjective thing, and it's really hard to get anything subjective across when you're talking about it.
I mean, there's a considerable part of game development and, selling games to players and, even selling an idea to a friend is so subjective, right? Because your game idea could be good, but your friend may hate those types of games. And some people are good at recognizing that, some people are not. We have his videos on Arcanum's dialogue systems. Yeah, Tim is just a master of knowledge and sharing it. He's so good at boiling it down into easy to understand ways, which is one of the core needs for a game designer, right? Is to communicate things in a very succinct, simple to understand way, and it's something that I struggle with and I'm trying to get better at.
Trust me, if you watch my video on bad games where I say there really are no bad games or any bad games for you, and then read the comments and watch people just do mental gymnastics and backflips to try to prove that there are bad games.
Well, and I think that we talked in that video too. I think we watched that one, and that one I also mentioned that there's no bad game design. There's just game design that doesn't work for the game you're making. It's a very similar concept, right? It's just everything is subjective, and something that is bad in one game might be great in another. One of the examples we used, which is not a perfect example, but was Goat Simulator. In most games, fixing bugs would be core to making the game stable and polished and to avoid bad reviews. Turns out, if you make a game that doubles down on the bugs that won't cause crashes and are just funny to look at, you can make a perfectly selling game too. So, even things that are more in lines of production and the stability of a game, right? How polished it feels can be up for debate. Sometimes jank is very well remembered. Some people love the jank of Elder Scrolls Oblivion. Sometimes jank is what really gives you those memories that a game was fun.
And forgetting that I said that there are bad games for you, but you can't declare a game bad for everyone. Here, I've proved it. Here's my proof.
Yep.
And they throw out things like, well, what about a game that crashes a lot? You mean like mine? Or they throw out games that aren't completed, which I've played tons of really excellent games that really never were finished. The end of it is it just falls off.
I mean, you can still like a game that crashes, and you can still like a game that is unfinished. But that's exactly why, yes, some people may dislike that. I don't know, what's a good example? Stalker 2 was crashing for a lot of people. We only experienced a few crashes, so it wasn't really bad for us, and maybe a game that crashes often but saves often too is, you can kind of look past it. So, yeah, sure. I mean, I can understand that, a game from the standpoint of its stability, crashing all the time could impact heavily whether or not somebody likes the game, but it doesn't really have to do with the game's design. That's more of something to do with the technical aspects of the game itself. And some of that can age too, right? Like Oblivion ran well on older systems, but if you try to get it working on modern operating systems, it can be a problem. Actually, unfinished stuff like early access games, yeah, I struggle if that falls under the realm of what Tim is talking about. I think those are fair counter arguments, although I don't think Tim was necessarily speaking about those specific issues.
So I'm not going to repeat all that. I'm just going to say what I'm saying here is kind of subjective. Now, it's hard to define flavor, but let me make it clear that flavor isn't game vision. Game vision is the director holds in their head and tries to express through all their design docs, especially through all the pillars, how the game will be played and what it will feel like and what you do when you're playing it. To give you an example of this is Arcanum and Fallout had very different visions, but very similar flavor. I think a lot of people, once they played Arcanum, they found out it was made by the people who made Fallout, went, oh yeah, yeah.
Maybe with flavor he means like how the systems feel combined together, and maybe like just a mix of genre, aesthetics, and story elements, or maybe story elements is not the right word, but themes in the story or in what the world is trying to convey. So maybe that's what he means by flavor.
A lot of my games have a Tim Kaine flavor to them, and people have said that. It's not part of their vision. It's also not part of the qualia. Qualia is even harder to define. Qualia is that ineffable quality of experience something. It's often described as, when you see the color red, that's the qualia of red. When you taste an apple, that's the qualia of the.
What is? I've never heard of this term qualia. What is that? What does he mean by that? Qualia? In philosophy of mind, qualia are defined as instances of subjective conscious experience. The term qualia derives from the Latin neuter plural form qualia of the Latin adjective qualis, meaning of what sort, of what kind. The redness of red is commonly used example of. That is such a that is such a big brain way of thinking about things. Such as what it is like to taste a specific asshole. Oh my god, I almost said asshole. This particular apple. Yeah, what is it like to taste a specific asshole? I'm sorry about that. That was a Freudian slip there a little bit. Examples of qualia include the perceived sensation of pain of a headache, the taste of wine, and the redness of an evening sky. Interesting, okay. I gotta think about that. I never heard that term.
The apple. You can write books about the color red. You can scientifically describe what the flavor compounds are in an apple, but that is not the same as the qualia of actually experiencing it.
Interesting.
To put it again, flavor isn't qualia because Fallout 1 and Fallout New Vegas have very different qualia. The experience of those two games are wildly different. I mean, one's isometric and the other is first person. One's turn-based, one's real-time. But they have very similar flavor. There's a reason I put Fallout New Vegas in my masterclass video.
But I mean, couldn't you then say like flavor is... I think comparing Arcanum and Fallout is better than comparing Fallout 1 and Fallout New Vegas. Although I can see what he's meaning, but of course I feel like the flavor between Fallout 1 and Fallout New Vegas would be similar because they do try to achieve the similar things with their lore, their humor, and I don't know what. I'll let him continue. Because I think I understand what he means by flavor, just from a like game design perspective, but I'm curious where he goes with it.
So, I think it's important that your game have a defined flavor. And this is something the game director has to do. And let me just warn you right now that if you don't want to do that, if you consciously choose not to decide on a flavor consciously and express it to the team making it, you've still made a decision about the flavor. I mean, just listen. If you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. Listen to Geddy Lee. He was right. There's a lot of jokes about trying to make things
I wasn't expecting that.
inoffensive and think about everybody who might be upset about something you do in your game. And I think the problem with this is this leads to people consciously choosing unflavored, making that their choices. I'm going to make this game unflavored.
Dragon Age Veilguard. Yes, I kind of said that it lacked... I think that I would word it differently, although I think flavor... I'm not saying that flavor is a bad word to use here. I think it's a more succinct word. But I think I described it as just lacking any sort of. It didn't have anything to say. like it didn't know what it wanted to be and what it wanted to accomplish, and it certainly didn't feel like any any flavor combination that had anything to do with Dragon Age Origins, for instance, or even Inquisition, the previous title in the entries. So yeah, he's right though. I mean, if you consciously choose not to have anything that you're doubling down on, or what your game should feel like in terms of what it's trying to say and what it's trying to be, you are still making a choice. And I wouldn't trust a game designer that wasn't trying to emphasize that or word it in some way. But it makes me think about my own game, and that maybe I haven't explicitly expressed the flavor of our game of Golden Chronicles enough yet, and that might be something that I should do and could absolutely benefit from doing. We have our pillars, we have our gameplay loop. I know exactly what the game should be, but I think especially with regards to how it should feel and what it's really trying to say, yeah, I don't think that's very well defined at the moment, and gives me some things to think about.
Kind of like Maud Flanders.
You gloomy gusses, who's up for a big bowl of non-fat ice milk?
I want wintergreen.
Unflavored for me.
Wait.
I love that scene. Let me just warn you that if you try to avoid offense in order to get broader appeal, your game will probably come across as exceptionally boring.
Dude, Tim called it. When did this come out? 6 months ago. July 12th. He called it, man. He called it with Dragon Age Veilguard. I feel like he's just talking about Dragon Age Veilguard before the game even came out. I think that there's another good quote back when, well, I'll just say the name, but I don't want to have a big discussion about it. Jordan Peterson mentioned that to speak is to risk being offensive. That you cannot open your mouth without somebody taking offense to something that you say or the way that you said it. So if you want to have anything to say of importance, you will likely offend and cut somebody off, especially with games, right? I mean, we talked about today that Golden Chronicles, ideally, I should offend everybody who plays the game in some way. With something that one character says or another character does, or a way one character believes, or the way that some in-game culture feels, I want to make sure that everybody has something that they might not agree with and a reason to maybe ethically or morally disagree with NPCs that arrive to your door. Now, that doesn't mean that every NPC, but that there is at least one NPC in the game that may not fit your own values or way of looking at the world. And I think that's exactly where that conversation, or a good conversation, starts, is where you have this fundamental philosophical or moral disagreement with someone else in real life. I mean, that happens all the time. Look at politics. Everybody is disagreeing at some level with their neighbor, their family, their friends, their loved ones about something on a core fundamental level of their own principles or values. And I think that's where the most interesting discussions start to happen. And if your game is like Dragon Age Veilguard's writing, at least for me, right? Because I felt that the game was bad. Other people liked it. But when I was speaking to companions, it felt like there was no friction here. There was no disagreement about the way that the world worked, or about the things that they need to do, or about, just there was nothing to say. The game was just, okay, you can be a little bit of a therapist to these characters, but generally speaking, they all are agreeable. They're all, have very specific ways of viewing the world that don't really seem to offend anybody. So, yeah, and it was boring. It was boring. It was soulless. It just felt like these characters are going to enter and leave my brain. Simple as that.
I'm sure you've all played very plain, vanilla fantasy video games or tabletop games that just don't seem to have anything going for them. In fact, I will warn you now that if you plan to become a game director and your idea of how to be a game director is to compulsively filter yourself, then maybe you need to watch Community and see the scene where Abed comments on Britta.
I'm really glad you said that, Brito. The idea that you compulsively filter yourself makes you like a flavor kind of a flavor.
Listen to Abed. Abed spits truth.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of talked about that today in chat too, where game directors are this really difficult mix of conviction, principle, and vision, but also they're team leaders that need to stomp on their own ego enough to be able to divert and fork their own path if something better comes along. And it's a really really hard, you know, coupling of emotions to work with and to get right and working fluidly. But it is just an absolute necessity. Arcanum had companions that would refuse joining you depending on your karma. I think there was an edgelord mage that would tell you to saw it off if you played a neutral or positive character. A lot of games are afraid of doing things that can be missed or locked player out. Yeah, I mean, I think that FOMO is one of those, or fear of missing out, if you're not aware of that term, is one of those things that game directors and publishers actually fear too. So, you know, when I pitch to publishers, I mentioned that ideally, I think that players will experience about 50% of the content in Golden Chronicles. Now that's scary to them because the vast majority of players will only play through Golden Chronicles, our game, once, right? So I'm telling them that they need to give me a lot of money so that most players can only experience half of the content that they're paying me to make. Try selling that. And, you know, it makes sense, right? Because it is a branching narrative. It is an RPG. And so, yeah, it's like you're not going to experience a good portion of this, but other players might. And I think that that's where the selling point actually is the amount of content in the game that is catered specifically to your decisions. But, you know, people in the financial industry, the suits, as I like to call them, don't really like to hear that. But I think the players, by and large, do. And I think that it also makes the game, even if it isn't repeatable or replayable to an individual, because maybe it takes about 100 hours to do a playthrough, it is very replayable from a observing perspective. Like, if you play through a game where you have all that branching decisions, you might be encouraged to watch other people's playthroughs or talk about it, or, you know, watch Twitch streams or YouTube videos where people play completely different ways of playing through the game, being super evil, being, you know, restricting themselves, and how that changes the narrative. So, yes, you may only play the game once and experience it the way that you wanted to experience it, as any good role-playing game, but you might also engage with content outside of it, which is still a form of marketing the game, of keeping it alive for long periods of time. We can see that with really any good RPG. I mean, Skyrim and Bethesda games are still huge on that. People doing challenge runs, or, you know, maybe restricting themselves to only a certain part of the world or only using certain skills. Games where you might not experience all of the content, I think, are some of the most well-loved and time-tested, or I don't know what the word is that I'm trying to think of here. They stand the test of time very well, because they allow for so much variation in their gameplay.
So, I'm just telling you that as a director, as someone who's directed several games, I'm just telling you, as a director, you do need to pick a flavor. If you do not, your game will be boring and vacuous and unmemorable. Now, it's possible to make a flavored game that's all of those, but I guarantee you, if you try to go with no flavor, you're guaranteeing it. You're putting the stamp of boring right on your game.
He's right. And, you know, another common phrase people use is, you know, a game for everyone is a game for no one. And, you know, I have talked to people and seen people who want to try and make that game for everyone. And it can't happen. It can't happen by the very nature of art and of humans and our individuality. It just, no art has ever worked like that, and it never will. And I think that's one of the beautiful things of art. But you know, it's also something you need to consider. Just, okay, we're making a conscious decision to make this character unlikable. Some people will not like him. Some people may not play the game because we provide the option for you to help this character, even with their controversial views on the world. Maybe they have no problem killing and murdering, or same thing, and you know, doing horrible things to other people. And maybe the mere idea that you can be friendly to this character or overlook their misdeeds will turn some people off. I'm okay with that personally, but some people aren't and some publishers aren't, and we've talked about it before. The larger the game budget, the more that money is going to have to be returned, right? If you have a game like Dragon Age Veilguard that cost, I don't know, a couple $100 million in budget, probably 300 to 400 million. Not only does that game need to make that 300 to 400 million back, it needs to make even more money to satisfy the investors. So the only two ways you do that is to sell the game to more people and or increase the price of the game. In Veilguard's case, both. And we can see it didn't meet sales expectations. It definitely didn't make its money back and probably won't. And people did find it, by and large, pretty bland. I can't believe you're turning Spoon woke. I'm out. Fuck this community. Spoon is definitely not woke. Spoon is a weird mix of all kinds of problems.
So, let's say you're with me so far, and you're like, yep, gotta have a flavor. Yep, it's not Division, it's not the Qualia, it's its own kind of like vibe. You then need to enforce this. And this is why it's so incredibly hard. Go back and watch, and I'll link all the videos I'm mentioning, I'll link below. Watch my game director videos, especially the one where I talk about game directors and their ego. Because people will accuse you at some point of being a dictator because you're throwing out work that is good.
That definitely didn't happen today at all. But no, we've had a similar situation actually even before where somebody mentioned that they thought the game would be better with sword and shield as opposed to using potions for combat. And that's one of those things. It's like, well, I don't disagree that having swords and shields in this type of game could be fun, but it doesn't align with our vision and a way that I believe we are making the game unique. So, I am okay with this person just, look, you are not the target audience then. This is not going to be a game for you. Put God in the game like with deep cut. It is what it is. It's like sometimes a game isn't for you, and he's right. As a design director, you do need to have I wouldn't say that it's ego, but I would say you just need to have conviction and confidence that the game vision that you set out with, or that the team has set out with, is a good one. And that's why you also need to be good at filtering out games that are bad. That when you are a game director, not every game idea you have is going to be good. You need to be able to be like, nope, this one's bad. Throw it out, throw it out, throw it out, throw it out. You got to have enough ego to not get one guy. I think that's a good way to put it, yeah. So, and that happens a lot. And you just need to be able to say, you know what, this game is not meant for you. I understand if you want to make a game like this with swords and shields, go for it. I think it will be successful. But I also believe that we are right with the direction we're taking. I don't know about taters, but I can show you a tater shaped dick. Shut up. Shut up. So yeah, it's like, we had I don't know if he's still around, but if you are, I'm not calling you out. I'm just stating that there can be a misconception in the perception of defending a view, because as a game director, you do need to defend that view, and it could be wrong. I believe I'm right, but I could be wrong. Versus instantly changing direction and spending time and ultimately money on doing something else that I don't feel would fit with our vision of the game.
And I've talked about this. The hardest work to throw out of your game isn't the work that's bad. Usually when work is bad, you can point out to someone, hey, this isn't written well. The character's not coming across. It's very, aggressive and negative, and that's not what we wanted. It's much harder to throw out really good quality work that just doesn't match the flavor of the
Exactly that. I mean, we had the idea early on of it would be cool because you can collect ingredients in our game to also make food. Like, the initial idea was that you would sit around like you'd have an NPC show up, they might pitch a tent outside, and you could talk to them, and maybe they would, you could give them some food and things like that. But it was, not only was it very large in scope, but as cool as it was to use your ingredients for multiple purposes like that, and then have the flavor be much more impactful in the food, it just doesn't fit with the vision. It doesn't mesh well with the game. And the example we use is that every game is a soup, right? You can buy the best ingredients. You can source the Italian tomatoes and the best looking and most firm feeling herbs and spices, and the greatest stock of from chicken or from beef, and you can mix it all together in a soup and it could taste like shit. So the best ingredients don't make the soup. The best combination of good ingredients makes a good soup. And sometimes you can use mediocre ingredients in a really good combination to make a much better soup than one that uses the best ingredients but doesn't really combine them well. So, consider that.
The game. And since the flavor is hard to express to someone when you're
Speaking
making
of flavor,
before the game is done, it's hard for people to see the flavor. It's why many of my games, I've talked about this with Fallout, I think it happened with Arcanum. It certainly happened at the beginning of Outer Worlds. It was really hard to explain to people what the game was because there was no game yet. And it's a lot easier, I can tell you, like making a sequel. Now that I'm actually making a sequel with the Outer Worlds,
yes,
it's easier to point to what the flavor is. You can say, play the first game. There's the flavor.
I will also tell you that's exactly why sequels often get made, is because one of the most difficult parts of being a game designer and pitching a game that isn't made yet is the fact that it is not made. It is untested. So if you make a game that is like, really similar to Call of Duty, the market has already tested and confirmed that games like this are successful financially, and there is a market for it. But the moment you stray outside of those bounds, you incur risk. And the higher the risk of your game, the less likely you are to make money from it. And that, I mean, like, get funding from it, right? Because it's untested. It's an untested idea. And when the game isn't even made or playable in any way, you can't confirm whether or not it's fun. There are so many things that sound fun on paper, but are not fun in practice. For instance, a good one is MMOs. A game where you can build anything and anywhere. And you can do PvP with people anywhere. Some of these things on the surface to a lot of gamers will sound great. And what it really just turns out to be is an unfun, unrewarding Rust server. Where the rich get richer, the strong get stronger, and anybody who's new and trying to make their way and build a little hut and have fun will just get destroyed and killed by people who don't care. So again, some of these things sound good in practice, but aren't. What was I trying? I don't even know. I went off a tangent about that. Oh, it was about selling pitching game ideas. Sorry about that. I get really sidetracked. So that's why it's easier to make sequels where you've already tested that idea. You know what the market liked, because people will say the game was amazing in these ways, but I wasn't a fan of XYZ. So you can just fix or remove XYZ, double down on the things that people liked, and you can make a sequel that will already have an established audience, an established set of characters and lore, and the gameplay is already established, and you can just kind of jump into making another game with reusing assets, which saves a lot of time and money, and just build on top of what is already there. I mean, look at Borderlands 1 and like Borderlands 2. Good example of a perfect set of sequels here. So, it is what it is. The higher the risk, the less likely you are to get funding. Unfortunately, that also means that the more likely you are to get games that, especially with larger budgets, will lack that flavor, lack that sort of risk, and attempt to do something new.
So that's something that you're going to have to figure out. Likewise, I'm never going to be able to tell you what your flavor is.
Yep.
You will have to figure that out. My games have a Tim Cain flavor. Your games are going to have a you flavor. And that's why you have to be careful, because when you ask people to work on it, they're all going to bring their flavors. And it's going to be hard for you to keep your flavor distinct or the only one. Sometimes mixing a bunch of flavors together into a melange. Yes, I saw Dune. I read Dune. And I speak French a little bit. Sometimes melange works. Usually, though, if you've ever done cooking, you can't just throw a bunch of random spices in a dish and hope it works out.
Tim, you're stealing the things I'm saying. No, it's a very common analogy used here. I think it's a really common one in game design. It's just the mixing of flavors in that soup or that dish, right? So yeah, it's exactly that. It's exactly like me and Tim are saying.
So I can't tell you what your flavor is, but I can tell you, to extend that cooking analogy, what's a good recipe for you to figure out your flavor. If you've ever heard of the cooking method called salt, fat, acid, heat, try to follow that in your game. Salt makes flavor come out. It's an element you put in. Salt has its own flavor, but it also makes other flavors stronger. It's why people even salt salads and not just savory dishes. I put salt in my brownies because if you don't put it in there, the flavor doesn't come out. Just a little bit of salt. That's why sometimes they sprinkle salt on top of brownies. Brownies. Anyway, you need elements of the game that accentuate your flavor. They may not be the carrier of the flavor, but they make your flavor stand out. Similarly,
Yeah, like maybe what would be a good example? Because I want to take these. Sorry, Tim, for pausing on a unkind frame there. What Let me think here. If he mentions like salt brings out the flavor, what would be bringing out the flavor of Golden Chronicles? And I think that our flavor, our main flavors are like our pillars, right? What are the things that are the strongest in our game? Maybe the NPCs, the narratives. So maybe the salt is the micro reactivity, right? Where rather than just being an RPG where yes, you can click on different things, it leads to different things, we do change subtly the way that certain things are presented, or the order, or small little ways to change the wordings if you have uncovered certain knowledge or talked to an NPC about something before, where this does not make the game, but it adds enough flavor where you can tell that enough time and care was spent in crafting the narrative to make it feel like it was written just for the exact combinations of your unique decisions throughout the gameplay. Gamers usually already bring enough salt, though. Yeah, and I don't know if that brings out the flavor.
Similarly, fat. You put in fat in the dish because it carries the flavor. It doesn't accentuate it. It lets it spread out everywhere. In your game, what that means is you need to have that flavor in everything. You want your lore text to be flavored. You want your dialogues to be flavored. You want location names to be flavored. It's something that you have to think about. If you want this world to really express itself, how would people name where they live in this world? That's why there's a junk town in Fallout, but not in the Outer Worlds.
Yeah, I think about that too. It's making the world feel believable, even if the world itself is outlandish. You're setting a precedence for what the world is and how it expresses itself and how the people live inside of it, how the cultures express themselves inside of it. So when I spend a lot of time on a prototype to think of this lore, like the sunblight and the ice marches and why it's a bit of a contradiction, or the change from the white city to the black city, that is the flavor. That's me trying to show players that I want to take this world seriously, and that there is a deeper lore to it beyond this forest, this shitty desert, and the lake that you have in the prototype. And he doesn't add werewolves. I mean, maybe we will. We don't know. To me, I'm not very good at writing it very fast, so narrative designer. That's where we would probably have somebody who could be the owner of the world and the lore, and be that one-stop shop for passing ideas through, right? So like, I'm the game director, but we would make somebody else the lore director, and that would be where everything would be filtered through. MTX and Battle Pass are trans fats. That's pretty funny. I like that.
And then there's a rose way in Outer Worlds, but not in Fallout. That's important. Just like fat spreads the flavor everywhere out in your dish, you've got to do that in your game.
Mm-hmm.
Acid. In terms of game, I think acid is giving your player a little surprise, making them go, oh. It's especially true when you go, oh, you didn't realize that my flavor would lead to this.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, and that's exactly what I think the example where you cannot cast magic in Golden Chronicles unless you help a specific NPC who will teach you a spell, thereby unlocking that part of the HUD that you previously couldn't see, which was your mana. That's the unexpected, and that's something that changes the gameplay, and is something that you just wouldn't expect when you played a game where it had previously told you that the game would work like this. Didn't know there was magic. When did that happen? Exactly. Well, we've been talking about that for a while, where I wanted to not provide any magic for the player, but if you help an NPC, you might learn one spell. So you're not a proficient mage, but by helping this one character, you've unlocked a spell that can now augment your potion use or prevent you from having to waste a certain effect on a potion, like immolation. You learn, like a little tiny fireball. Now you don't have to primarily rely on immolation potions or potions with the immolation effect to create the immolation effect. You can also use spells that cost mana. And now, previously unusable or unnecessary potions with restore essence can work on you because you now have that mana that you manage. So I think that would be the acid for our game, the unexpected.
To me, I loved it because I think some of the acid in Fallout were those end slides when the game went, I was watching you.
Same, exactly. And that's what I love. I hated that was non-existent in Baldur's Gate 3. They've kind of fixed it now with the epilogue, but on release, if anybody played before the epilogue, the game just ended. There was like one scene where you kind of just like, okay, I won't spoil anybody for it, but there's this one scene and then like the game just kind of ends and you never like, wait, what happened to my companions? What about all the places I helped? All the factions? And it just doesn't tell you any of that. And it felt really anticlimactic and unrewarding. So in our game, there will be end slides, not only for NPCs, but also for regions of the game that you might have affected with your potion making. I want the player to exactly feel and to be able to compare and share with others their own outcome with the game and with the NPCs.
I saw what you did there. I saw that you were mean to the ghouls.
Exactly.
I saw that you killed children. I saw that all these things happened. So those traits that got applied to you, like chem addict or child killer, or those slides that showed up at the end of the game, was the game's acid, just basically saying, hey, I explained the flavor to you. Why are you surprised? This is part of the flavor. And then finally, heat. Heat to me is just in the game putting some pressure on the player, having tension, whether it's dramatic tension. I mean, that's what the timer was supposed to do in Fallout. It was supposed to add a little heat, a little pressure, a little tension to the player. You try to do that in the storyline. Hey, if you don't do this, all these people are going to die. Hey, if you don't do this, maybe your brain is going to deliquesce.
And I think those are pretty extreme examples, but there's also good ones. Like if you think of like Stardew Valley or something, that heat can just be the transition to another season. So there are certain things you want to fix up and to complete before the next season comes around, and knowing that you'll have to wait another year of in-game time before being able to do that again. So like fishing in the spring to catch that rare fish, I think it has to be raining. But when you start the game, of course, your rod isn't very good. So you can do it in 1 year, but it's going to be pretty hard. You'd have to really double down on leveling up your fishing and getting good fishing gear. So there is a little bit of that pressure, but don't worry. Spring will come around next year and you can do it then too. In Colden Chronicles, our game, I'm not sure what the heat, I guess the spread of corruption, but we don't have that implemented yet. But that will probably provide some heat. And there is a change of seasons that will occur too, and that could provide some of that similar heat of, okay, I need to make sure I have enough ingredients for the winter, right? Maybe some ingredient in autumn is really good for certain effects, and having a good store of that by winter will be very helpful.
That was the original heat of Outer Worlds. You've got to put something in the game that adds some tension. And that can be part of your flavor. It doesn't have to be super hot. It just has to be there. So, God, I've talked a lot about food, but flavor is food. I hope this video will be something that will help you when you're actually making your game, when you're thinking about your vision, and you're thinking about design pillars, and you're thinking about how to be a director, and you're thinking of that qualia of what the player will experience when they're actually playing your game. You will also think, what's my flavor? What's my personal flavor, and how is it being expressed in this game I'm making? Hope this helps.
Yeah, great video. I think that his analogy, I've never heard the, salt, fat, acid, heat analogy, but that's a really good way of putting it that I think is pretty easily understandable. I'd never heard of the word qualia before either, and that's something I'll have to delve into on my own time a bit more, but a lot to think about. And I think, yeah, he brings up a good point. I don't think Colden Chronicles has a very well-defined flavor, even though I think that I know what that flavor is. So putting that into some design documentation would be very beneficial for the people working on the game. A lot to think about, but he's right. When you're a design director, you just need to define these things It's why one of the first things that I say to people who are making a game, make your loop, make your pillars. You know, set up what the game is actually meant to be and accomplish and how it's going to work minute to minute before even jumping into making the game itself, right? Maybe you do have to prototype a little bit to, you know, define it more, or to maybe you change one of your pillars because you didn't realize that something would be so fun. You know, for us, it was that I didn't think that we would go deeper into the RPG aspect. So when I pitched Golden Chronicles initially, it was as like a adventure or puzzle game kind of thing, right? The NPCs weren't meant to be super deep. But then as I started playing with NPCs and I got deeper with it, I was like, wow, okay, hold on. No, this is really what brings out the meaning to making your potions. And I think what provides this game with a much more unique twist, where rather than just being a simple shopkeeping game, this is now an RPG. And so we redefined our pillar of, I think it was originally NPCs, it was just listed as. Now it's storytelling and how we accomplish that through the world and through the lore and through the NPCs themselves. How hard was getting your visa residency in Poland? I don't have it yet. So hard. It's hard. I'll say it that way. But yeah, this was a great video by Tim. I will share the link with you guys. Go give him a follow and go give this a video a watch and a like. Really, really awesome. And yeah, that was a great one. So thank you for watching that one. I will catch you on the next one. So take care, YouTube. Bye-bye, YouTube.